which is a great effort for our first webinar. We look forward to working on those numbers and bringing this network together. All panelists are muted and your videos are off. I invite you to use the chat function if you wish, but also to use the Q&A function to send through your questions. My colleague, Kathy Soden, who's a committee member, will be collecting those questions and we'll break halfway through the session and put some of those questions to the panelists as well. Okay. Also, my fellow committee member, Mark Hubert, who will close the session and give our thanks to the panelists and some calls to action. Mark will also be standing in as host in case anything happens to my link or my kids start chewing up the valuable Wi-Fi that's circulating in this house as they all do distance learning. So I hope we'll have no technical problems. Anyway, before we get started, I just wanted to share my screen with you and just make a few introductory remarks about the AIDN network. So we've been established as a chapter committee of Philanthropy Australia. This is an important additional member benefit that the Philanthropy Australia have brought in recently. We've aligned our mission around more and better international development from Australians in with PA's broader mission, and we're bringing attention to the philanthropy and impact investing scene, focused obviously on all those different sources of capital and support that are flowing internationally. We felt that the international development conversation needed to have a stronger sort of voice and a sort of more coordinated place to meet and engage. In terms of our purpose and objectives, we came together, firstly about 2 years ago with what was a manifesto at the time, and you'll see that on your screen. The manifesto set out a few belief statements around what we believed was important in relation to international development and what the opportunity was for Australians to engage with international development. But I do want to dissuade the view that this is a one-way sort of us helping them, because in fact it's very much a two-way proposition. And I do want to recognize that some of the most progressive programmatic work is happening in the field of international development. You know, organizations and communities working in some of the toughest circumstances with the most scarce resources, some of the practices and insights that they develop in the field there, we could really benefit from here in Australia. And I also recognize the program logic, theories of change, and that programmatic design that's been very much part of international development and that we are now using in philanthropy in Australia. You know, those sort of skills and expertise we need to basically bring in field here as well. So let's see this as a two-way proposition and really an opportunity to share and convene with our poorer neighbours. So we aim to promote opportunities for tangible and measurable impact for these communities. And I'd like to also acknowledge the generous supporters, the Vazadara Foundation, the Dawn Wade Foundation, the Cubitt Family Foundation, and more recently, the Ripple Foundation, that have come behind our work in the last 18 months, and as we move into the next phase for the next 18 months, 2 years. So thank you very much indeed for them, for their support. So a few words about our panelists quickly. Firstly, Reverend Tim Costello. I'm sure Tim needs no introduction, and Tim, I'm sure you've been very busy on the webinars today, but just to acknowledge you're a national treasure to all of us and a respected community leader and voice of social justice. Relevant to today's conversation is your role as co-chair of the Crisis Cabinet convened to engage with government and shape its response to COVID. You're also the Executive Director of the Micro Australia and a coalition member of agencies and church groups who jointly with the agency Purpose have really brought this End COVID for All campaign together, which culminates today. So look forward to hearing more about that today. Omala, who's African Portfolio Managers at Partner for Equity and wears a couple of other hats with grant-making organizations, including the Planet Wheeler Foundation and the Siegel Family Foundation. Eve is Ugandan by birth and spent many years as Director of Operations for the Siegel Family Foundation in Africa, distributing about 12 million annually to 200 grantee organizations across 24 countries. So there's a wealth of experience and knowledge that you're bringing into the conversation to hear, Eve. So we look forward to hearing your views and thoughts as well. Mark Ingram. connected business into inclusive development, investment programs tackling extreme poverty. So Mark and his team at Brightlight are helping investors and philanthropists with opportunities to bring their capital into the equation and do good while earning a return. And hopefully you'll bring some of the, what you're seeing out there in the international development field, Mark, where capital has a chance to play a role in the sort of change process. Dave Rickards, last but not least. Dave, welcome. Director of the DAC Foundation, a family foundation based here in Australia that he leads with his wife, Kerry. Dave and Kerry were the founders of Australia's largest bargain store operator, Clint's Crazy Bargains, I believe. When they sold the company, they took their business skills and applied them to international development. And amongst other projects, the DAC Foundation has funded over 200,000 successful eye surgeries in the developing world. And I know, Dave, you're going to share some stories around how your engagement with these programs and these communities had to change with COVID too. And we look forward to hearing about how that is shaping up for you and your family, and obviously the communities you support. So that's a bit about us. I'm now going to stop sharing and we're going to get into our conversation together. So Tim, if I can start with you, I suppose COVID is the perfect enemy, and so to speak, it's maybe nature's revenge. It transcends state boundaries. It's been very indiscriminate in choosing its victims. And as yet, we don't currently have any weapon to fight it. So as you've said, it's not over until it's over for all of us. So maybe throwing the first question to you, Tim, is COVID the pandemic we had to have to remind us of our shared humanity?
Yeah, no, you never wish a pandemic on anyone. The truth is that the self-righteousness, often arrogance, self-sufficiency, and even profound nationalism that we've seen with retribalising before COVID has been brought up short with this virus. It has reminded us savagely we are biologically linked, and a virus has shown us this. We are utterly interdependent. A virus has shown us this. We have certainly seen that the most vulnerable, those who suffer disproportionately, are those who are poor. And that's true in first world countries, not just the developing world where my focus and your focus is. We've seen that the underlying fractures of race, particularly in America, of inequity, people who have to go to work even if they're sick, maybe working a couple of jobs here in Australia, carers between aged care centres, not well paid and having to work a number of jobs, have been disproportionate. Lifts of this virus, we see the fractures under and suddenly that affects all of us. And the reality of this isn't something I would ever wish for, but it is shining a light on the fact that we who travel and are rich were the ones who brought the virus into our own nation and across international borders, but now it is the poor in refugee camps, in slums from Indonesia to India, in PNG, the poor who never travelled, who never had our Qantas Club lifestyle, who actually are the most impacted by it. So the equity questions are profound, which is why I'm very, very thankful for this forum and why we've launched at MicroAustralia End COVID for All, which has been firing up particularly today.
Yep. And tell us a bit more about the End COVID for All appeal, Tim. What do you hope to achieve?
We hope to get Australians and our government to look up and beyond just Australia. 150 organisations, businesses, universities, churches, Islamic relief, health bodies signed a full-page ad in the Fin Review saying essentially our borders might be shut, but our hearts aren't. and those nations with fragile health system where the virus is raging are our responsibility. We can't just say it's all about us. And today the Prime Minister and the Secretary of DFAT, who have seen our full-page ads, who are seeing the masks that our influencers are wearing, which say end COVID for all, have announced, yes, while we're locking down 25 million vaccines for Australia, the Prime Minister has said we have to actually try and make them available and free to the Pacific nations and our regional neighbours. Bill Gates has been making this point for a while. Rich countries should set up manufacture and distribution systems with a properly high price point, so poor nations actually, from the money made out of the price point, can get access to the vaccine also. Yeah. So vaccine nationalism, which the World Health Organization has been warning about, is right at the center of our end COVID for all, with our eyes on our neighbors.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim. You spoke about, obviously, COVID shining a light on inequality. Eve, I'd love to bring in your perspectives here around what this looks like and feels like on the ground for communities, particularly in Africa, and where you'd have some now rip through those Southern African nations. Obviously, South Africa is topping the chart. Most of these communities are returning to their rural areas. To tell us, Eve, how are your community?
Now, I mean, lots of things are happening, and there's so many stories coming out of the different African countries, and seeing is it's just becoming increasingly difficult to access medical services. So countries like Uganda, for example, during the lockdowns, public and private transport was banned for non-essential sectors. That meant that people could just not travel to hospitals or anywhere, even to markets. In countries like Kenya, there were very tight curfews. And again, mothers could not travel to hospitals to deliver. And as a result, of these tight lockdowns, we're hearing many stories of women delivering at home and increased maternal deaths. And also in a number of countries such as Kenya, Malawi, Zimbabwe, we're seeing that health workers went on strike because the government was just not providing PPE. So last Monday alone, I think a story was published last Monday, and this is from Zimbabwe. In Harare Central Hospital, 7 babies died. They were stillborn after the wards became overwhelmed because nurses were on strike. So it's such stories that we're hearing. And, the transport bans mean that people cannot access their daily medications. And we're talking HIV and TB patients where, if you don't take your drugs consistently, that could result in drug resistance. We're seeing kids that are missing vaccines, and that could be a bigger issue in the future. There is a big increase in food insecurity, so we could be looking at a hunger pandemic. And, every day we're hearing stories of people going to bed hungry, people taking ARVs without food. Now that is very dangerous.
Virals, are they?
Yes, these are antiretroviral drugs, and people do not have food, but they've got to take their medication, and it's really dangerous to take such strong meds on an empty stomach. So we could see more deaths from hunger than COVID-19. And the other thing that we're seeing and hearing a lot is high pregnancy rates, especially among teenage girls. Recently, I think this was in June, the Kenya media released a story where they were saying that close to 4,000 schoolgirls in just one county had been impregnated during the COVID lockdown. This is 4,000 school-going girls. And many of the organizations we support are also reporting that they're seeing an increase in pregnancy rates. And these are girls aged between 12 to 19 that are showing up at their facilities, pregnant. And of course, lots of stories around gender-based violence, child violence. I think South Africa, they reported 90,000 cases of women that were experiencing domestic violence in just their first week of lockdown. And of course, stories around increased child marriages. When parents are going hungry, when families are going hungry, the first thing they do especially the rural families, is give their daughters away for dowry so that they can sell these assets to get food for their families. So girls are being given away, and it's just devastating. And I've not even touched the unemployment rates, which are just skyrocketing. So in Uganda, unemployment is projected to be about 4.4 million because of COVID. And in Kenya, we're seeing that, you know, from the travel and you know, are threatened. And the flower industry alone in Kenya laid off about 30,000 temporary workers and has sent another 40,000 permanent staff on unpaid leave. So there's so many things going on the ground, and I could go on about these stories, but the impact of these lockdowns could even be worse than the collateral damage that we're seeing.
Yeah, those numbers beg a belief, Eve, and yeah, as you say, it's a perfect storm. So many contingent sort of issues all arriving at the same time, and some governments taking political advantage of the COVID lockdown and sort of, you know, I suppose coming down in totalitarian ways around mobility and protest and I suppose just human rights generally. One of the reflections that we had coming into this webinar was obviously poverty, and as you've heard from Eve, is very likely to escalate significantly from here, despite all the gains that we've made in the last couple of decades. And the Sustainable Development Goals obviously were the framework that was aligning all of us around some common language with respect to closing those development gaps. And they also put a price, I suppose, a call to arms of additional funding, you know, $2.5 to $3 trillion they were estimating a year to really fund this poverty relief. Now, Mark, those numbers are significant, and when we think about private giving and the report that AIDN commissioned that's up on our website in relation to what Australia's giving internationally, about $1 billion a year, you know, those numbers of $2.5 to $3 trillion a year, those, you know, those are private giving's a rounding area when you consider what's required. Maybe you can describe the opportunity for other sources of capital to now step in to the breach and what you're seeing from Brightlight.
So what Brightlight is exploring is capital markets and how they can provide monetary solutions to international development. Our parent company is Christian Super, who for 15 years now have made impact investments globally. Yep. About 2/3 of their allocation for impact is in emerging markets. And ultimately the holy grail, Simon, is to see more super funds in Australia do the same, take the same path, because there's precedent now and there's the evidence that that works. But while you build out the kind of deals that super funds can look at, you are starting with smaller fund expressions. We're working with MFAT and DFAT on funds, which we can describe later, that are at the $50, $100 million bracket, which is well suited for trusts, foundations, philanthropically minded investors in the Pacific, in Southeast Asia. And ultimately, there's potentially a COVID-19 vaccine bond issuance that we're actively talking with Jane Hansen, CEPI, European financial engineers about. So there's multiple layers to this, but ultimately the super funds are the primary source of scaled capital that could contribute to that gap. The other comment I'd make on that SDG gap is that about 3/4 of that is infrastructure. Yeah. And therefore deploying investment that has risk return profiles into infrastructure that enables inclusive development, better health systems, education systems, and so forth, is a legitimate role for capital markets. But we certainly need to see a growing momentum between 2020 and 2030 to get there.
And Mark, just a quick comment on how COVID has accelerated the interest in I suppose using capital for impact. What's the initial response you're seeing out of some of your stakeholders and institutional wholesale investors?
And so after somewhat of a shell shock phenomenon back February, March, with investors thinking, how do we manage for liquidity constraints, market disruption, volatility? We see that hibernation period now resurfacing to reconsider new funds, new investment opportunities. So we've decisions, and we're still on an education path to explain to
a family foundation, and indeed a family like yours has and the conversations you're having around the table at home and with your peer groups, how has that conversation shifted with COVID in relation to the opportunity to support international development? You're on mute, Dave.
Fix that.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry about that, Simon. Yeah. The world, but whereas we were focusing on how we could help people progress, we're now focusing on how we can help people survive.
Yeah,
I think that Eve put it, she spoke about collateral damage quite eloquently. You're living in a slum, you don't have any assets, and you live hand to mouth, and or you go back to the country where maybe your family is. I was saying about pregnancy rates, about to the women that desperately need them. Baby bubble in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, in December, January. To cope with that, fully stretched.
Yeah.
So look, it's not good. Violent crime is increasing, as Eve mentioned, maternal and neonate mortality. And then the biggest worry for us, which is also something Eve touched on, is that with broken supply chains of important medications like HIV and particularly TB, people come off their treatment because they can't access the drugs, and then, wow, they build up drug resistance to TB is going to kill a lot more people than COVID.
And the conversations with your peers and others, you know, has that changed in any way? Showing more interest in what you're doing, asking for information around how they can help? Has there been anything in your community that has changed around the opportunity for supporting international development? Tim, the End COVID for All campaign involved signing to government to get them to step up and play their role. I suppose
yeah, so the End COVID for All campaign is really to try and join up the sectors, government and international NGOs, business, philanthropy, universities. There are a range of players that actually dip into this and don't always get alignment, and then the fact that it's not been a great story in political leadership in this nation. The 2014 budget, 20% of the savings Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey made came from 1% of the budget, namely overseas aid. 20% of all of their savings from 1%. So it was really dramatically smashed. And I remember talking to Tony Abbott as Prime Minister, and he said, "Oh no, aid's only for good times, Tim. We're in bad times." Bad times in 2014. So really the competing with our domestic poor. So we can't do both. Is it New Start or is it international aid and people overseas? End COVID for all is to reframe that, to actually say we don't make our poor, you know, why do we set them up to compete against the international poor? This is a wrong framing. We have the capacity to do both. Now, the political realities are that the Pacific Step Up, which you would have heard a lot about, is really just a Pacific makeup. The extra monies that have gone into the Pacific now have only brought us back to the 2012 level of aid from the Australian government. We've only made it up. And we've done that by pinching aid from Southeast Asia and South Asia, Nepal, Myanmar, elsewhere. Really, what we're seeing with End COVID for All is that moment of human vulnerability I talked about, and interdependence, to say, actually, we can't just say, let's wait for good times. We were in them and we stayed. Can we now actually step up? And that's why I was encouraged by the Prime Minister's comments today, and also the head of DFAT, who's communicated personally with us, saying, wow, there is a groundswell of support of Australians saying, we do care about these things. We see that actually we can't just close the borders, turn inwards and look after ourselves. That is giving political cover for some in government who actually have these instincts. And I'm talking about Simon Birmingham, I'm talking about Maurice Payne and DFAT, who have our campaign on their website. Alex Hawke, the Minister for Aid and Development, who actually quietly is really, really pleased about this campaign because it gives them cover against the nativist voices that are so strong to say, don't ever send a cent overseas. Yeah. But I think behind that, we have to come together. That's why I think what you guys are doing, what some of the universities and businesses are doing, along with international charities, getting alignment, voice, vision, casting that vision is really, really important.
Yep. And showing some solidarity. I know DFAT are quite interested around how they can better engage with the private sector as well, and which is kind of partly why Absolutely. AIDN has an opportunity, and we have a DFAT representative on the committee, or with links to DFAT, Jeremy Stringer. So we feel, yes, this opportunity to connect in, but also acknowledge that the government needs to show leadership, and it needs to, I suppose, also reflect that over 50% of Australians are either first or second generation. So a lot of us have been born overseas with strong relationships to brothers and sisters in countries that are often poorer, when most are poorer than Australia. And as Eve, we were chatting the other day, remittances from wealthy countries like Australia back to these poorer countries are a really important financial lifeline. So I think that codependency and the way the pandemic has shown this up as being the sort of really issue of the moment is really important. There is a worrying trend around the vaccine nativism, Tim, and I know there's an announcement Morrison made around the Oxford vaccine and sort of making sure that we were in the queue. A lot of commentary around how the vaccine actually, potentially if there are 2 or 3 that get developed, the rich countries will get the good vaccine and the poor countries will get the poor one. So in some ways, this idea of a vaccine for COVID being a public good, and I think President Xi in China made this point, in a way, how do we make this a reality, you know?
Yeah, so Bill Gates just says rich countries need to buy the vaccine and donate it to the poor countries. Like PPE, which all got snapped up by the rich countries, we saw what happened. We are deeply at risk of this happening with the vaccine now. Yeah, which is really what our campaign is trying to shine a light on.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mark, you mentioned CEPI earlier, which is the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. So obviously philanthropically funded by Gates and the Wellcome Trust, some other philanthropists, but also I think 25 different nations. They have a mandate that any vaccines developed within the CEPI program are a vaccine for all, so to speak. Tell us more around, I suppose, the COVID alliance that sits behind CEPI, and obviously they need to think about not only finding the vaccine and funding its manufacture and distribution, which in itself is going to require a lot more capital than philanthropy can put on the table. What are you hearing around, I suppose, capital coming to the solution, if you like, around the vaccine sort of side of things?
So I think watch this space, Simon, because we still need to get the vaccines through development, and I've got some upcoming conversations with Europe. CEPI's provided funding for the likes of University of Queensland to provide candidates on an equitable distribution basis. Gavi in the past has issued bonds for like Ebola in the past, but there's nothing of this scale that's ever been done before. The requirement to front load financing that can be paid back over the years by governments is a highly sophisticated piece of financial engineering. What I'm hoping we can do in Australia is tap into investors to buy the COVID-19 bond when it's issued and participate not only through philanthropy, through aid, but through the deployment of capital to finance those bonds. And Jane's been very generous to connect me in, but I don't have the clear answer, Simon, and it seems to be falling between CEPI and Gavi in terms of how they're going to build out the instrument. But watch this space. Yeah.
And the WHO, I think, are bringing a coalition together, but they're also seeing governments stepping away from their commitments. We know what happened with the US. So this is going to be a really interesting puzzle to solve. Just Mark, on governments and the way they are wanting to, I suppose, partner with private capital, can you just share a couple of examples around how DFAT and also DFAT's equivalent in New Zealand, MFAT, how they are using the impact investing, I suppose, opportunity to leverage their reduced budgets, some might say, for opportunities to invest in international development?
So for us, this is quite exciting that DFAT are now saying we want to catalyze blended finance, impact investing. One of the examples is a notes issuance, so a fixed income security 3 to 5 year loan to SMEs in Southeast Asia that we've been designing with DFAT. We're looking at an issuance first quarter of 21 calendar year. That'll be $100 million to help SMEs where they're really needing support at a critical time of hopefully some forms of recovery in 21. MFAT have got most of their programmatic interests in the Pacific. They're looking at a blended finance fund. I mentioned 3/4 of the SDG gap is real assets infrastructure. So how we get solar power and information technology solutions to rural communities, bolstering health and education, real assets, looking at the digital economy, looking at outsourcing service industries across Australia, New Zealand into the Pacific. All of that is queuing off PACER Plus, which is a regional trade investment agreement that's also due for ratification in 2021. So a lot's coming up on the horizon, and it is exciting to see the donor agencies thinking laterally about how they can get private sector investments.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So moving on to Eve, just the conversation you and I were having the other day, and when we first met the Philanthropy Australia conference a few years ago, where you were presenting on a panel talking about international development and opportunities, you told a story about the Segal Family Foundation and how it was investing in the education of, I suppose, young aspiring people within African communities, and that I think the comment you shared was for a few $1,000s we could take a child from primary school through to a bachelor's degree, you know, and the value, I suppose, the value for money on the assumption that all lives are equal was an extraordinarily attractive proposition for the Segal family, and something that other co-donors were coming in behind because of that, I suppose, fundamental principle of a sort of shared value of life. So tell us a bit more about, you know, it's now you in Australia and sort of straddling these worlds, how you see and communicate this opportunity for impact for Australians to support programs such as that.
Yeah, so I think the opportunity for philanthropy here is that, you know, there is, of course, better value for money in offshore funding. A small investment in a developing country can go a long way, and it can impact way more people and change way more lives. I'll walk you through a real example of an organization that we work with, a grantee partner called Food for Education in Kenya. So it was founded by a graduate of Adelaide University, and she moved back to Kenya to provide meals to kids in Kenya, in Nairobi public primary schools. So there was no one providing food in the schools, and kids were going to school hungry, and of course that increased the dropout rates for kids in this school. So she's currently feeding about 10,000 kids at a cost of only 18 cents per meal. And she's growing to about 100,000 kids within a year. So she's accelerating her impact quite fast. And during this COVID period, she's been able to provide 1.7 million meals to kids and their families at a cost of only 9 cents per meal. So that's how much impact you can make and you can have with just a minimal investment. 9 cents cannot do much in this country, but 9 cents is equals to a meal for a kid somewhere in Nairobi. And we find that, you know, we've built a network of people that we can trust to spend our money. So I could share very many stories of people like these, but there are people on ground who we can trust to spend this money well. These people are having great impact. They're very transparent, and they're giving accountability for what all this money is doing. And of course, it's through networks like these that you can be connected to such people. So there's a lot that you know, little dollars can do in Africa and lots of the developing world.
And tell us about the engagement behind the Partners for Equity platform. You know, obviously, in some ways, the barriers for international giving come down to trying to find the right vehicle or the right channel. What's happened in Partners for Equity in the last few years and how that's built a kind of coalition of funders? Can you just sort of give us the sort of high notes on that?
Yeah, so we've built this, I would call it the African Grassroots Portfolio. And the reasoning behind that was that a lot of money, of course, is going to international foreign-led organizations in Africa. And of course, we also know that not many dollars are going out internationally. Yeah. So it was built behind the rationale that if we invest more money in grassroots organizations, but also get more money out through the doors, just beyond Australia, beyond America, you know, we can impact way more lives and we can achieve more impact with that money. So we built this grassroots portfolio. It's currently a portfolio of about 12 organizations, all locally led, all based in different African countries that are doing significant things with their communities. And many of these organizations are still small. Their annual budgets are only about, I would say an average of about 250K to 300,000. But you can imagine with just that much, they are reaching millions, you know, thousands of people, and we're seeing communities being transformed in ways that, you know, would never happen. So we see that a $20,000 grant, a $30,000 grant is enabling these organizations to turn around an entire community.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Eve. And Dave, as a participant on Partners for Equity, as well as some of your own programs, tell us around your experience and what's happening for your family foundation's grant programs right now.
Simon, say the last bit again, please.
So tell us about the grant funding coming out of your foundation in terms of the opportunity for impact, Dave.
Oh, okay. Well, like I said before, we're kind of focused on people's survival at the moment. So we are we've reduced dramatically, not by intent, but
yeah.
we've reduced our two major programs dramatically, and that is the eye surgery program and also the fistula and prolapse programs. So they are surgeries, if you like, that are elective surgeries, and that's left us with surplus cash, and we're using the network that we've built up over the last 20 years of trusted friends that are embedded in genuinely poor communities, and we're asking them to identify the households that are truly vulnerable,
yep.
that are in real trouble, and then we are providing direct assistance. Now, I never would have thought that we would ever be doing this.
Yeah.
You know, it's almost counterintuitive compared to what we used to think, but right at the moment, it's something that we're pushing as hard as we can, and we feel it's the right thing to do.
Yep.
So typically, the direct assistance would be food hampers, food parcels. It could be coupons to go to the supermarket, and what we're really looking at now is cash transfers, because that's a lot safer. And if you can get the amount of the cash into the hands of that household, and they can decide how to spend it when their needs are so high, it's probably more appropriate than giving them a food parcel, where they've got perhaps different tastes and different numbers of dependents and so on and so forth. Yes, so that's our response at the moment. Yeah.
Can I ask Dave a question? Do you think, Dave, what is an eminently sensible change of direction for you, given COVID and direct cash and direct support, might be more attractive to other philanthropists who probably know that more sophisticated development models are on hold, but haven't thought of doing what you're doing?
Well, what we're doing is not original. There's an organisation called Give Directly, and they have just sprung up over the last 3 or 4 years. They're a really big INGO now, and so their deal is that you give them $1 and they'll put like 88 cents of it into the hands of a poor person.
Yep.
And that has been, for reasons that you're alluding to, Tim, that's been a huge success.
Yeah.
It really resonates with people that don't understand development or don't trust it.
Yeah.
And so it's been hugely successful. So successful that USAID have now been pumping money in there and saying, you know, go to this country and do cash transfers for 200,000 people. And, you know, we've been talking with Give Directly, and we tried to get them involved in what we thought was an ideal opportunity, somebody in Kampala that I'll probably talk about later. And they agreed that there was a database where we could identify truly vulnerable people, and that's what they wanted. But USAID had said, unfortunately, they'd said, we only want to distribute these funds into families that live in particular parts of the country where we have offices.
Yeah.
I think that was the way it was expressed. So what we're doing now, and you know, we're doing it using, Eva's been helping us, she's Ugandan, and she's been helping us, and it's great. So we are going to go ahead and fund that ourselves. Yeah.
Fantastic. And
Yeah, I might just say, Simon, what I like about that, Dave, is that everyone here, philanthropists, are turning inwards and funding what the needs in Australia, but they all know there is job seeker, job keeper. There's no job seeker, job keeper in Uganda and in poor countries. And what Give Directly is a safety net that may be plausible to philanthropists. They actually get that idea.
Yeah, right.
And
Yeah.
we know governments don't have resources.
We think we actually think of what we're doing as JobKeeper. It is the equivalent of JobKeeper. The only difference is that instead of being $1,500 a fortnight, it's more like $15 US a fortnight, and the people use it to buy staple foods and medicines, not so much the bigger TV set and the fitness equipment. And that's the reality. And we talked about this before. It's come up. The cost of doing business in a developing country is so vastly different to what it is in Australia.
Absolutely.
That the $15, $20 a fortnight, $40 a month, a family can actually survive on that. Yeah. And I think it's a message that needs to be just constantly hammered home to all of those people that they think about philanthropy, but they get all confused about it. If the cost of doing business, the purchasing power in developing countries is so great that for us, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah. It takes us back to charity in some ways, which is, I suppose, just very generous hand-to-hand support. Eve, you talked about how some of the programmatic work you have also changed towards is that sort of cash transfers, food parcels, things that really come down to what Dave was saying earlier around just survival. There's no JobKeeper, you know, there's no jobs. I mean, the unemployment statistics you mentioned are across Africa. I think Zimbabwe's at 95% unemployment. You know, it only has a small slither of people that are formally employed. So for the rest of them, it's a sort of hand-to-mouth existence, a cash economy, and they can't afford the luxury of social distancing when they're standing in queues for food aid or for water. So this is why COVID is really drawing out those stark kind of inequities in how they live, and I suppose drawing a much more, I suppose, compassionate response from philanthropy to help them with what they really need. Eve, did you want to respond there around some of the program sort of shuffles that you under the various hats you wear have been sort of making?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, it's just difficult. And, you know, on the funder side, of course, we've also had to make really, you know, big adjustments. And this is where a lot of patience is required. So you find that, you know, many of these grantees, they're going through a lot. They are, you know, front lines, they're seeing all these things unfold just before their eyes. They're having to work from home. They've never had to work from home, figure out internet. And some of them are in environments that are not even ideal for work. So as a funder, you know, you have to understand that reporting timelines are going to be affected. Delivery on programs is going to be affected. So expectations have to change with some of these grantees. And of course, we understand that also many of them are very nervous about what, you know, the future funding outlook is going to look like. So what we've done is that we've been extending reporting timelines for grantees. And we've also, you know, we've had regular communications with them, assuring them that we're going to fulfill our existing funding obligations and not just cut funding halfway. I think it's very important to give our grantee partners this confidence, because what they're going through, you know, they've never had to go through this. And of course, largely we provide financial support, and the world has been very generous, during these COVID days. And some countries have been successful in raising money for their COVID efforts. But we believe that, the true test to this financial impact is going to be felt next year. And we think that some funding could decline next year, but also the impacts of COVID, we won't know the extent to certain impacts until the data starts to come out next year. And it's these grantees that we support that are going to have to be there to address all of this. So we're trying to, wait, hold on a bit and see how much they've been impacted financially without going all out, pouring out cash, and then trying to see how we can come in to meet the gap next year. So being more flexible around the funding that we're giving.
Yeah, and that's a good point. The Great Depression took 5 years to really show its worst. In many ways, this is going to be 3 to 5 years before we really see the full effects of this. And we've got to help carry them through it, right? So just to make the point, a few questions coming through on the Q&A, please share them. I'm going to just put a few more questions to the panel, and then we'll invite Kathy in to put some of those questions to the group. Tim, looking ahead and starting, I suppose, acknowledging that we're at the beginning of a very long road here. What happens next after the end COVID for all appeal? How do we translate any short-term success into a sort of longer-term movement?
Yeah, so this first phase ends tonight. There will be a lot of church groups and other community groups having a night to end COVID for all. It's been at one level a feel-good campaign. Who could be against ending COVID for all? Well, I was feeling good till I posted my picture wearing my mask in COVID for all, and the number of responses. We should just look after our own. We have no responsibility to anyone else. Rather shocked me. I thought this was an apple pie sort of campaign until I started to see that. But it just underscores again why a government does need cover if it wants to do the right thing and shows some leadership.
Yeah.
Richard Nixon famously said, "There ain't no votes in aid." And boy, do we know that. The people who are helped, whose lives are saved, actually don't get to vote in our elections. So you've got this profound disconnect. The second phase of End COVID for All, having built now a large database and thousands of people signing the pledge, is to really turn that into political capital. So parallel to the public campaign, there have been quiet meetings with 25 coalition members saying things have changed in every sense. We are in the region where most of the world's poor live. We have, apart from responding with a Pacific step up, largely driven by fear of China moving into our backyard, left a vacuum, gone missing, not as a middle power shown leadership on this. How do we get bipartisanship, vision casting and leadership? Not getting spooked at the first utterance Pauline Hanson makes. And here's the interesting thing. I remember going and seeing Pauline Hanson. She came out and saw me, this is a year ago. "Oh, I've been worried all day asking my staff, why is Tim Costello coming to see me?" And I said, "Well, Pauline, it's about aid and aid levels." "Oh, we're against that," she said. I said, "I know. Have you actually seen an aid program, Pauline, one funded by the Australian government?" She said, "Yeah, actually, I went on a politician's trip to an eye clinic outside New Delhi, funded by Australia." I said, "How was it?" She said, "I was really moved. It was really impressive." I said, "Could you just say that, Pauline?" "Oh, no, because my people are all against it. They'd carve me up." And I was really struck by, one, the lack of leadership, even to actually tell a story of something that moved her. Two, what is this fear that has been baked into the Australian public, almost inward-looking, xenophobic about others, and victimhood, that we are doing it tough and hard. Anyway, enough of a rant, Simon. There's going to be a second phase to end COVID for all, which is turning the public collateral now into more political collateral on this, and almost certainly vaccine nationalism will be the next spearheaded focus of this.
Yeah, fantastic, Tim. I'd like to turn to some questions now and invite Kathy Sowden, who's been pulling those questions together, to come onto the screen. Hey, Kathy.
Hi,
Welcome.
how are you?
May I just hand the mic to you and take us through some of the questions that are being coming through on the feed. That'd be great.
Thanks, Simon. We've got a lot of questions. Firstly, Simon Vaughan asks you, Dave, great question here. What was it that drew you to funding international work, and how do we get more funders in Australia to include international development in their giving? You're on mute, Dave. There's always
Yeah, look, I'll try and answer this quickly. When we sold our business, we had a lot of money, and we started dabbling in philanthropy because we thought we should. And when we dabbled as most people do, like we now call it the bleeding heart syndrome. So we started traveling, and we started building orphanages and schools, and taking photos of little kids and so forth. And that made us feel good. As we got more interested and we traveled more, understand the bleeding heart syndrome was really patronizing. It was a bit of a slap in the face, actually, to the poor people that are living in terrible conditions. And so we gradually, and we also became a little bit cynical about international aid and how self-serving it could be. And that made us kind of really, really passionate about going back to our roots of optimizing resources to be good at business. And that drove us. And so I guess in a way, we're now doing what we do best, doing what we did during our working lives. And so for us, it's all about bang for buck. Yeah, that's the motivator. And very quickly, because it did come up the other day, we came across Chuck Feeney, the American-Irish philanthropist, the billionaire that wasn't, one of the 5 heroes of the 20th century. And Chuck said to us, he said to us that you made the money, you get rid of it. And that's really resonated. And I think it's a terrific thing for rich people to contemplate when they're getting into the latter stages of their lives. I mean, if you're good at making it, chances are you'll give it away a lot better than other people would. Yeah.
Thanks, Dave. Just a follow up to that question. Why do you give directly to the programs on the ground? I mean, don't you think that within the context of a global pandemic, we need some sort of broader, more coordinated perspective?
Kathy. Sorry, Kathy, you broke up there and I couldn't get the question.
I'm sorry. I've told the kids to get off the internet. Dave, why do you give directly to the programs on the ground? My question was, don't you think that during a global pandemic, we need some sort of broader, more coordinated perspective or response?
Oh, well, sure, but it's not happening.
Right.
You know, even I could tell you stories about, you know, what happens to money that is distributed through government in Africa. It just doesn't happen. So and besides, we are what we are. We're independent people, never had a job, you know, always done our own thing. So, you know, that's the way we like to do. We like to work at the coalface, and we really, really like tangible results rather than ideas and concepts. So.
Okay.
Can I jump in there just briefly?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll just add on to what Dave said. I think it's also very important for funders to realize that these organizations on ground know exactly what their problems are. They are the best people, they're best positioned to know where this money should be directed and how it should be directed. And top-down solutions don't work. So I believe that they should be trusted with their own development, and organizations should, funders should feel confident in giving them that money directly, because they are going to make the right decisions for their communities. And they too are impacted by the problem. So I think we should trust them to make the right decision.
So, Eve, how do you know that the money isn't going to bribery or being wasted?
Yeah, interesting question. I've been doing this for a while and following up a number of organizations. You know, you have to get it right at the point of identifying the organizations that you're going to work with. You've got to get it right at that point. So I'm from Africa, of course. I know how to navigate this landscape. I know the questions to ask. It's important for, of course, it's important for many funders to build a relationship with their partners. You find that sometimes, typically, where things tend to go wrong is where that trust relationship has not been established, where you've got fears and worries that, you know, they might use my money wrong or this or the other. But once it starts off from that point of trust, you know, you start to build that trust, that openness, that transparency. Many of these organizations on ground are really in it for the right reasons. They're in it for the right reasons. And if you are part of these networks, I mean, like, I believe AIDN is, you know, it's a good network of people that have already been giving internationally, and they know exactly what to look out for. They know how to, I guess, spot the right organizations. You know, you could be nurtured into trying to, you know, having the same traits and identifying the right people on ground to give your money to.
Okay, thank you. Question for Tim. What happens with this campaign and the momentum after the day after today, so tomorrow? Surely this is an ongoing conversation that we need to be having with the government, and COVID is far from over.
Yeah, absolutely. So this campaign was conceived 2.5, 3 months ago, and the nature of the virus then, certainly speaking as a Victorian, was we'd come out of lockdown. We can appeal to the gratitude in Australia that we've dodged a bullet and turn our eyes elsewhere and say we're going to support countries elsewhere. And then, of course, in Victoria, we're back in lockdown. And the anxiety of watching the number of infections each day and deaths, particularly from aged care each day. Sadly, numbers, we don't hear names, we don't hear stories, we don't hear the personal dimension of tragedy here. Seemed to evaporate for a while, that sense of, well, gratitude. We are grateful, we've dodged a bullet. It was, oh dear, Australians are going to be again just saying, look after ourselves. So we can't pick the contours of this campaign. The really gratifying thing is the unusual suspects that have come on board. So when you have churches like Hillsong, who the Prime Minister is very close to, when you have the Murdoch Press, which will be publishing 8 stories in its mastheads in Melbourne, Sydney, Adelaide, about it, Aussie heroes in the field in developing countries who are there telling their stories of the vulnerability and the suffering. You've got an unusual suspect, the Murdoch Press, actually not just doing the nativist thing. So that's why the campaign was conceived with a sense of getting our arms around a whole range of people. And yes, we chose to tell the stories of 8 Aussies, often with INGOs. Unfortunately, Australians listen to Australian voices. The truth is, most INGOs also our local INGOs, that in the context where they work, just as Eve and Dave have been saying, they know who to trust. It's not to go, a dollar's not to go near military or government or police. That grounding is profoundly important for the credibility of international NGOs. And, you know, I might say my time at World Vision, I think the best thing we ever did at World Vision was what's called Citizens' Voice in Action, which said, you're a citizen, you have a voice, you can act. And we'd write up in every village community we're working, the dollars we were bringing in over the next 10 to 15 years for development and saying, your job is to hold us accountable. We're being transparent. These are the dollars coming in, and you will mark our homework, which is a bit scary for, you know, often the practice of wealthy donors. But then to say, and by the way, if you're asking us to build a school, who should build the school? Well, actually it should be our government. Well, why isn't your government doing it? Why do you need World Vision? Well, who knows where the education budget went? Palaces, weapons, Swiss bank accounts. And then we would say, the deal is if we build the school or the health clinic, we're here for 10 to 15 years, you're not only holding us accountable, we're going to train you to know what was in the education budget for your region, and we're going to train you to work out where those monies went, where the leakage was, the corruption was, and use your voice. And the most moving moments in my World Vision career were actually seeing vulnerable, poor communities, often illiterate people. They might be illiterate, but they're smart, who had tracked the money, who had then organised and removed corrupt politicians or education or health bureaucrats in the government, and had them removed, often working at it for years. So that side of it is profoundly important. Now, End COVID for All tomorrow, as I said, is taking the collateral and going on in terms of the political campaigning of what we need to do, and trying to hold together a very diverse sector to say, actually, we do have responsibilities, and we still, given our health system here, are blessed.
Great answer, Tim. And I'm fascinated by the portfolio of people you managed to bring together in one campaign. A question for Mark. Against this pandemic, when impact investment achieves a market rate of return for your investors, how do you justify that as a form of philanthropy? Isn't it just investing for profit, but with some sort of good feelings thrown in for the investor?
So one of the basic premises of impact investing is it needs to be additional capital that's contributing to solving a problem. So if you're shifting capital and market rate or below market rate, investors have got different expectations, but it's shifting it to where it's not currently channeled, and in the Pacific would be a prime example. That's a key criteria, along with being able to measure the beneficiary outcomes that would not have otherwise occurred. So you need the baseline, the counterfactual, to be able to make a claim that that's a legitimate development outcome. What we're also seeing is capital cooperating. So donors, concessional investors, and market rate all coming together to solve development problems by getting money to cooperate together. But yeah, there are safeguards, and GIN, which is a global body that presides over defining impact investing, is very clear that there needs to be additionality of capital.
Fantastic, thank you. Eve, a question for you. We understand that you're now based in Brisbane. So how do you really know what's going on the ground in Ethiopia and in the other programs you work in?
Yeah, COVID has tied me down here. So typically I travel back to Africa around 3, 4, 5 times sometimes a year. And for each of those times, I'm there for about a month, 3 weeks to a month seeing programs. So I am on the ground quite often, but also I think I just spend my time on calls with different organizations that I work with. So my entire day, my entire afternoon when Africa wakes up is calls most of the time. So I'm trying to keep on top of things. And also my entire family is back in Africa. I'm the only one out of Uganda actually. So those touch points are quite frequent to try and get on top of what's happening in the different countries.
Thanks. We actually have a question for you, Simon.
Okay.
Will AIDN itself look to choose causes to support and fund?
So, look, as a broker, what AIDN's intention is to provide a platform for doers and givers to come together. So if you go to our website, we've structured it in a way that anybody interested in international development from a doing perspective can go and list their organization. We've got quite a few listed there. There's obviously, as you made the point, Tim, there's a lot of very enterprising and passionate Australians that have set up international NGOs and have a base here in Australia. We want them to be listed and we want them to be talking about what they're doing. And then the givers similarly can put up their credentials on the website and say, look, this is who we are. We're a family foundation, we're a corporate foundation, we're another source of funds certainly in terms of capital as well. We'd love to connect in with this network. So we're agnostic around the programs. What we'd like to do is not only setting up that platform and getting the details of doers and givers to come together, but also then start sharing and collaborating and learning from each other, a bit like what we've been doing today. We do accept that it's a very broad field. It's probably the one most fragmented fields in philanthropy, international development, because of all the different topical areas, but also the different geographical areas. And as you picked up from today's conversation, we're not discriminating between, granting capital and, using balance sheet support, because we feel actually international development is going to need all of that. And we need to try and find a way of bringing these conversations together. So we have a challenge, certainly as a new network, to work out how to triage these things and create member benefits, if you like. And we are using the next 6 to 12 months through a series of webinars to gain traction, to theme webinars in a little more of a narrow fashion, and then move towards a member framework where effectively the givers will be given an opportunity, a bit like the AEGN or AWGN, to sort of sign up for a nominal membership fee to become more of a participant, and then I suppose a traditional membership model will be in place. So yeah, we aren't here to pick and choose. We're here to create a platform to collaborate, share, and build that knowledge, and hopefully drive more and better international development as a result.
Great, thank you. This is another question. I'm not quite sure who to give this to. Let's give you a go, Dave. From Richard Beaumont. Entrust has found over many years that building a trusted relationship is key to effectiveness. We do not foster donor-recipient relationships, rather partner-to-partner relationships, side by side, coaching and mentoring. The question is, how can we better connect donors to partners, in spite of what Pauline Hanson may think but be too scared to voice? We need to turn on the mic, Dave.
Kathy, that's a hell of a question. And yes, how do we better connect? Well, I was one of the founding partners of Partners for Equity, and Eve works with us at Partners for Equity. And what we do is we find partners on the ground and we scrutinize them. And when we're pretty well 95% sure that they are effective and ethical, and only if one of the partners, a partner for equities, is going to be an investor in that NGO, then we make them a partner. So we've done a thorough assessment, they become a partner, we send them money, but we do provide a service where we auspice that money. We auspice donations from outside parties, but only to those organisations on which we've done this thorough assessment. That doesn't directly answer your question, but I think it indicates, you know, after 16 years of kind of being out of the business, what a long journey it was for Kerry and I to get to somewhere like Partners for Equity. Yeah, DAC is only a path. And so there are other organisations that auspice money. But I think it's just like anything else. I think it's like, you know, like maybe following horses at the races or gambling on the share market. You know, you've just got to get in there and you've just got to go looking for what suits you. And, you know, you've got the internet there.
Yeah.
So I think that's how I'd answer that, Kathy.
And Kathy, just to add on to that, certainly we've had some interest from stakeholders around sort of channels and opportunities to really engage in international philanthropy. So one of the webinar sessions that we run will probably be a International Philanthropy 101, the different channels, options, and certainly PBI legislation changes following the Hunger Project case have made, you know, more opportunities, you know, as Dave described, for PAFs in particular that have those requirements to sort of engage with platforms and conduits to sort of engage in international work. So that's something we hope to bring into one of these webinars.
Okay, we're probably getting on to the final question, I would say. For Tim, P&G donated over $60,000 to the Australian bushfire appeal. And given that 38% of Papua New Guineans live below the poverty line, and that there are potentially 5,000 to 10,000 people in Port Moresby with the virus, is it actually in Australia's interest, as well as our moral obligation, to help our neighbours?
Yes. Any
Any
other easy questions?
Okay, following up, Tim, what do you say to those who say, like Pauline, we should just be helping those in our backyard?
Well, I'd be saying to all Australians, not just Pauline, PNG's 4 kilometres across the water from us. In terms of enlightened self-interest, if we want the virus to stop at our borders, we've actually got to start by stopping it in PNG. That's the first obvious point. The second point is it is always a mystery to me, and to any of you who have travelled in the developing world, that you always come back feeling they are richer in some ways than we are. The joy they take in things that we, with our sophistication and so much drivenness, don't take joy in. Perhaps now until COVID, you know, I'm actually discovering the 5 kilometres of my neighbourhood I'm allowed to walk in and actually enjoying it. And there's that compassion from PNG for our bushfires, with so little compassion to us. And, you know, the mystery to me often with the complaints about whether it's government levels of aid or private funding and aid going overseas is that it is so little money. If you add up, you know, over the last 40 years, the amount of government donations to aid, it doesn't add up more than about $20 a person per year in poor countries. In New Guinea, it sounds a lot, $450 million, but it's the cost of a Canberra hospital, one hospital, and this is a population of 8 million. So those who oppose it always talk about so much money and so much waste and corruption now. Corruption is a problem, but it's actually so little money that's given. And the PNG example is a perfect one. And there they are in their poverty, thinking of us. And that is always a surprise for me, the generosity from people who are vulnerable is far greater often than the generosity I see from those of us who have very little to worry about.
Yeah, it's a bit of the parable of the woman in the temple, Tim, which I remember you talking about at one of those JB Ware breakfasts all those years ago. And in fact, what you've described there, I'll borrow the term from Alan Greenspan, it's almost irrational exuberance. How could these people with so little express so much joy and delight just in their daily worlds? I feel it's something certainly when I return to Zimbabwe, I come back thinking all the time. So thank you very much for your responses, panel. And I feel we haven't got through all the questions, and hopefully there'll be an opportunity to sort of draw down the chat, and certainly in relation to what's been discussed today, pulling together a bit of a fact sheet of some of the organizations, some of the platforms, some of the programs that you've mentioned, pulling that into the form of a fact sheet that we can share back with those who've attended, and maybe making that available on the website. So we're moving to the end of our conversation, and I wanted to just invite the panelists just to share a story of inspirational hope, because clearly we've got a long road to travel from here, and it's going to get a lot harder. And in some ways, developing countries and their communities know what resilience looks like. And I won't trot the African proverb out to you, but certainly, going far means going together. So I want us to just give the panelists a chance to put those stories forward, and whoever mentioned the PNG question was kind of stole my thunder, because that's what I was going to open this with. But really, it is remarkable that a community in Lae, PNG's second largest city, saw the Eden Monaro bushfires, and they said, let's, and I quote, they called out to their community to be united in one heart, to give from the heart, and to console our neighbor. And that was a community in Papua New Guinea thinking about us. So it's just a marvelous demonstration of the human spirit, and sometimes something that we can forget while we're spinning on our hamster wheels. Anyway, who would like to start in terms of just a message of hope and inspiration? Eve.
All right, I'll go first. Yeah, so 12 years ago, if you told me I would be doing what I'm doing now, I would have thought you're out of your mind. I was into IT computing, and for me, that was my future. But after a devastating experience with Uganda's failed healthcare system, I joined Global Health Co, which is a diverse community of leaders whose goal is to build a movement for global health equity. So with this network, it got me started on my journey towards fighting for fairness in our communities. And of course, this has inevitably changed my trajectory. And I'm talking to you today because of some of the decisions and things I learned through this network. And I've also been part of networks that convene funders and grantees in Africa, and have experienced firsthand how these networks have helped unlock opportunities within foundations, how they've disrupted traditional ways of thinking, and how they create ways that foundations can be more impactful. And I believe that this is the value that AIDN brings. There is so much that we can do as a network. There is so much that we can learn. And I believe that there is so much that we can achieve together.
Thanks, Eve. Mark?
I call out a couple of individuals that I've come across over the past decade that have inspired me. Simon, one a baby boomer and one a millennial. John Cook used to run Berry Juice Company, Golden Circle, came out of retirement down Peninsula, Mornington Peninsula, went into Kenya, helped connect cotton farmers with Cotton On in Australia, and built a really valuable supply chain that helped lift those communities up. And you'll have to take him out in a box, he tells me, because he enjoyed that experience so much. So he inspired me massively. Adam Milgram at Australian Communities Foundation, at the other end of the lifespan continuum, who agitated for change within a corpus of 100+ million to see it more meaningfully shift to sustainable, do no harm, and impact investments. And sometimes you got to push against the system and take a bit of courage. But people like Adam and Marie Saidi, who runs ACF, people like John, it takes individuals to do things differently, and you see amazing results.
Thank you, Mark. And then as in the last minute or so, Dave and Tim. Dave, if you'd like to go first.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so in 2005, I was in Bangladesh and visiting Grameen, the microcredit group, and we went to one of the women's groups. And in fact, we went to a lot of women's groups, and in every community where they had whatever it was, 20 or 30 women that were on these microloans, there was one woman who was the telephone lady. And the telephone lady, she used her $100 or $150, whatever the microloan was, to buy the phone from Grameen Phone. And then she would sell the use of that phone to other people in the village, because many of them had, they had their sons and sons working in developed countries and so forth. That woman, the phone lady, was a very, very important person in the community. And so, you know, I took note of that. And then in 2010, we're working with the 1 Acre Fund, and we found out that people that were poor people, that were farmers that were now accessing mobile phones, they were able to ring up and get the proper price for their produce. And as a consequence, they might be getting 20, 30% more because they could check. They didn't have to take for granted whatever the broker was telling them. So that was another experience. Then 2015, we started to hear about village health workers, community health workers being armed with phones, being armed with apps. And all of a sudden, someone with minimal training, if they had maybe a smartphone or a phone that had the right apps, they could provide primary health care. They could have perhaps a diagnostic app and another one on data recording and so on and so forth. And so I from my point of view, I think that technology is probably the most feasible way in which we can balance the scales a little bit, because technology that we're talking about, the phone networks and the devices, are so cheap and so affordable that I'd like to see a time when everyone had access, and I think that creates enormous empowerment and the opportunity for much better educational outcomes, health outcomes, and livelihood outcomes.
Thank you,
So
Dave.
that's my little bit of enthusiasm.
Thank you, Dave. And Tim, sorry, we've run down the clock, but we certainly heard a lot of inspiration from you, Tim. And I'm going to invite Mark Hubert just to come and give a vote of thanks to our panelists and a call to action. Mark, can you join us?
Yeah, thank you, Simon. And yeah, on behalf of all listeners out here in Zoom land, thank you very much for the time that you gave so freely today. We've got a lot we want to achieve with AIDN, and I think we got off to a great start today. Tim, you so eloquently put the case for raising our sights above our borders and reminding us that we have a wider responsibility. Eve, you shared so many stories of what's happening on the ground, from the tragedies of pregnant mothers not making it to hospital, but through to solutions like meals for children and their families at 9 cents per meal. Dave, you reminded us that at the moment we need to lower our sights from driving progress just to helping people to survive. But again, the argument that can be done for $40 a month. And Mark Ingram, you, I think today just gave us a small sliver of what's happening in your space, but front-loading the financing of COVID vaccinations with COVID bonds, yeah, that's a fascinating concept, and I think we can all hear more about that one day. It's been 2 long years of considerable effort by a small bunch of passionate individuals to make today effectively the launch of AIDN. Allow me just to talk briefly about AIDN and, more importantly, what it can mean for you. AIDN seeks to foster more and better international development from Australians. That means you, the audience. To me, there's one key word in the lengthy name of our organisation. This is a network. We aim to connect people. That means that if you want the best out of a network, you have to be a contributor. There's not going to be a large office, no retinue of staff. It'll be a nimble organisation, ably chaired by Simon, managed by Julie Rosenberg. It's going to facilitate, connect, and guide that networking. So from today, our ask of you, Google the hashtag #EndCOVID4All, go to the website and sign their pledge. That's your immediate put down the Zoom machine and go do it action for right now. And keep your eyes open for the second phase of their campaign. Secondly, as Simon spoke earlier, go to www.aidnetwork.org.au and have a look at the website. Then email Julie Rosenberg with your thoughts about what this group should do, what it should be, and how you can contribute. Just to remind you, we're financially supported, as Simon mentioned, by the Dawn Wade Foundation, Ripple Foundation, the Bussadara Foundation, and others. And we operate as a chapter of Philanthropy Australia. If you also want to contribute financially, tell Julie. We're working towards a membership model, but for now, thanks to our startup funders, we can park that discussion. And our next ask for you is just to spread the word. We want more and international development, more and better international development, so you help us with that more and better. And finally, watch out for details of our next webinar. In fact, don't just watch out for it, email Julie with what you'd like to hear about. We're building the aircraft as we fly it, as you can probably realise, so we're open to suggestions of what our next steps should be. So this can be your network, don't be a passenger. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for participating. Again, thank you to our speakers and stay safe.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Mark. And the metaphor of the aeroplane's an interesting one in COVID times, given they're all grounded. But AIDN will take flight, I promise you. And just for those of you that are still on the screen, there is a Philanthropy Australia International Philanthropy Award that we want to draw to your attention. We are looking for nominations, and those nominations close on the 28th of August. All those details are on our website. If you know of really good organizations doing funding work in the international community, we want to hear about them and we want their nominations in. So thank you to all from us, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.